Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about Wandering Witch, episode 4 and 5. It's the roundup review type video. We're not doing top moments, just a roundup review. So, without further ado, let's get into Wandering Witch. Now, if you watched the previous Wandering Witch 1 to 3, you know where my opinion kind of is for Wandering Witch. I'm looking at this series, and what I am now looking for, and the birds are also watching the series with me, what I am looking for is pretty much little clues that can tell me how shitty everything is in this world. And episode 4 and 5, definitely, episode 4 especially, both of them definitely help that general idea. There's a lot of things that we can actually glean from episode 4 and episode 5 that kind of does make you feel a little bit weird about the way that the world works. I do very much appreciate it. I'm gonna go quiet down the birds. Give me a quick second here. Okay, they get a little bit quieter in the dark. It's a bird thing. Anyway, episode 4 and 5 definitely give us more details. And, you know, one of my main things as well with episode 1 to 3 is that I'm really wondering, well, how useful are the witches, or how bad are the witches? And when it comes down to it, episode 4 specifically tells us more about the witches and gives us some interesting questions just about the way the world works, because episode 5 gives us another detail about the witches, which is again very interesting to keep it in mind, in consideration with episode 4. One other thing that episode 5 gives us specifically, episode 5 is the one that focuses on Elena's weakness, but now episode 5 I think comes in here with more world building details, specifically the whole thing about Nike. Like when you look at the pictures of Nike and her Faula, I think the name was, it's like very obvious, especially with the way that Fran talks about it, that Elena's mother is Nike. Like from the first episode, I was suspecting that, right? That felt very possible. And now you come into this episode and it's like, Elena, how are you not seeing this? But you know, that's because she's the character. She's in the middle of everything. I don't expect her to actually figure that out. But it is still very interesting. Episode 5, because it's so much world building though, I do feel that Elena gets away from that episode relatively nicely. But when you look at the dynamics for episode 4 and 5, episode 4 follows the formula of episode 2, because episode 4 is the one showing how maladjusted a witch is, and it's at a higher degree than episode 2. Episode 5 is showing a little bit of Elena's personal weaknesses, specifically with the part in episode 5 where Elena is saying that she doesn't want to have to face sad feelings, so she's going to go and leave. That part in particular is the one that matches the most with episode 3, because episode 3 has a very similar Elena running away. With episode 5, you can actually make the statement that Elena lives a very hedonistic life, and she's very much a coward. I don't think there's anything incorrect with saying that Elena is a coward, considering that she's the type of person who doesn't want to have to deal with negative feelings, and that's what also makes her very hedonistic. Now, what happens there when you call Elena hedonistic, though, is that when you look at what's happening with the witches themselves live very hedonistic lifestyles, especially with what you had Fran saying in episode 5, that the mages that graduate, they're just hanging out in the city. And mind you, Fran gave that a very positive spin, and I do think that was very positive. Again, episode 5 is a very positive episode, but episode 5 is the one that tells us more about Elena and her place in witch society. At the end of the day, Elena has become equivalent to the witches who didn't take her on as a apprentice, right? I see no difference between these two in terms of the idea that they're pursuing hedonistic lifestyles, or you know, for those that don't know the meaning, it's just engage in the pursuit of pleasure, or sensually self-indulgent. So you know, a little bit more sexually charged than the definition I have here, but I know there's more definitions. Let's just turn it back with the part that we want to look at there, specifically the pursuit of pleasure. So the pursuit of happy feelings, that's what I'm referring to. Elena is in the pursuit of happy feelings, and she doesn't want to feel sad feelings, to the point that she shies away from it. She is essentially a coward, right? I don't feel wrong saying that. Now, I do want to just continue talking about the nuances here, because episode 4 is an episode in which Elena is made the victim. The worst thing that Elena does in episode 4, because we had this chat on a live chat as well, but Elena doesn't know what necessarily is going on in the circumstances of episode 4. One of the worst things that Elena says in episode 4 is that she's not going to be helping anything, because she's not going to be helping because there's nothing for her to gain out of helping the other witch, which I think is That's very true to form. You know, Elena's mother told her, "Hey, Elena, don't let people take advantage of you." And now we're seeing her like actually apply that really aggressively. But legitimately, she didn't know what was going on until it was already too late. But Elena at episode 4, the worst thing she does is just turn a blind eye and leave. I don't know what the best solution would have been in that situation. Like, once that guy's dead, he's dead. Like, there was no coming back from that. So that might have been the best move. Again, you know, we're in like this really tough situation. I don't blame Elena that much for the events of episode 4. I do criticize her turning a blind eye to it, because that's what Elena does in general, and that's the cowardly behavior. But episode 4, again, she's the one, like, much like episode 2, she's technically the victim in this situation. She didn't know any better. Now, when it comes to episode 4 in regards to the witches are a pretty shit system from what I'm seeing so far, because I'm looking at this one woman by herself was able to ruin a country. Everyone's dead. And I'm thinking, what was the penalty for this? Like, the witches have some incredible powers. Elena has time reversal magic. That in of itself, already, that's a game breaker for most series. So I'm looking at this. The witches have access to ridiculously high levels of power. And the witches are also really maladjusted. This is something that we can definitely say is a thing given episode 1, 2, 3, and 4, between Elena's negative personality traits and the negative personality traits of the witch in the first episode. They are not people that I would personally believe in. So, and then when you consider the atrocities that is generally allowed to happen in the world, you know, I look at this situation and I'm thinking, if a witch goes rogue, they take out a whole city, why is it that witches are still being revered? And then you look at episode 5, the guy's telling Elena, and then coming into the Magic Academy, she's like, oh, I'm gonna just walk in there because I want to. That, again, that's a really high and mighty position for Elena. And when you have Elena talking about how pretty she is or how much fun she's having, it's like, yeah, man, I think you're kind of narcissistic here. The guard comes up to Elena and it's like, hey, you can't come in here. I know you're a witch, but you can't come in here. And, you know, that whole interaction, I see them respecting the magic users, but I'm wondering, a little bit of fear. I'm wondering if there's a little bit of fear, because here's this woman with power who legitimately could probably ruin a city if no one stopped her, and this guy's just doing his job, and she's just doing whatever she wants. There is a fundamental power dichotomy that's going on here, and I don't understand how the world itself is okay with letting the witches exist, when the witches have shown to be have shown the capacity to be maladjusted. And when I take that into consideration, to me it really feels like the world doesn't do anything to the witches because they're afraid of the witches. So you end up in a situation, I think, where people revere the witches. They might revere the witches maybe out of admiration, but I think also possibly a little bit of fear. The witches do whatever they want. They're not going to go out of their way to help in any particular situation. And then, God forbid, any witch actually loses it and decides to destroy a city, because the witches have access to incredible power, and the cost for incredible power is pretty cheap. Like when you have the lady saying like, "Oh yeah, I had to give up my memory in exchange." What do you mean you gave up your memory in exchange? You only gave it up for a few days. You got that memory back. That memory's back with you, girl. That's not a steep price for being able to turn your father into a monster that devours all his citizens, and also forces him to watch that whole process. That's not a very steep price. Now, mind you, in episode 4, like, this is nuance upon nuance. I think the father's still in the wrong situation. That was a tragedy. That was in every single way a tragedy. But what's important to take away from episode 4 is just how much damage a witch can wreak on society. So again, what I ultimately step away from episode 4 and 5, there's these little cues. I'm looking at it. My biggest questions are, is society afraid of saying anything against the witches, lest the witches go crazy and destroy a city? I don't think it's that extreme. I think that the show might still be going towards idealism, maybe. But right now, what I have taken away from episode 4 and 5, the witches are extremely self-centered. There is really not all that much altruistic behavior, and the first sliver of altruistic behavior really comes from Fran saying that the mages just want to play around with magic because they want to make people happy. That's really the first sliver of altruistic behavior that I've seen from the witches as a population, or from the magic users as a population. It's a really interesting situation, but I am very happy, you know. Like, I'm coming into this wondering how terrible are the world, how terrible are the witches, how terrible is Elena, and you know, I'm getting more details about that. Every single episode builds on those three fundamental questions that I have. Right now, you know, the witches are pretty terrible. Well, no. I think the witches are maladjusted with the potential to be very terrible, but I think Elena legitimately is terrible. I think she's a coward. I think that is bolstered by the things that she doesn't want to face up. Like, not wanting to face sad feelings, that's a pretty cowardly move. But it's consistent with what her character is. So, you know, we're here at episode 5. I am very, very curious where we're going to be at episode 12, because we're going nice and steady along the route here. And I want to see what note the anime wants to leave off on. Are they going to go on a dark note, or are they going to go on a happy note? Nah, I think this is really good. I'm very much enjoying seeing the... I don't think it's a deconstruction. I'm really enjoying seeing the dark notes behind the veneer of positivity, or the prettiness behind it. It's much like the flower field. The flower field is very pretty, but it's insidious in nature. I am very much enjoying that. I still think this is really nicely done. Anyway, everyone, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.